Mark Gurman, Bloomberg. Sources. Apple has discussed adding a higher-end iPhone Ultra model in 2024, probably offering camera improvements, a faster chip, and an even larger display. You know, an iPhone with camera improvements and a faster chip and a larger display sounds a lot like every year's iPhone. These things are not evolving in a meaningful way. We're just very clearly at the top of the S curve. We're making small incremental improvements. The second thing that jumps out to me is a phone with an even larger display. The gap between the smallest tablet and the largest phone continues to shrink, which, don't get me wrong, like I much prefer the smallest iPad as a computing device that I can drop into a purse and carry around wherever I need to go, and then sit down and have a relatively meaningful compute surface or interaction surface to work with. I think it's superior to carrying a telephone for a variety of things. There are, however, drawbacks that we've talked about in the past. The chief among those, Apple prevents a watch from pairing sort of to an iPad, and so I can't have a watch I can wear whenever I'm moving around the world and really only need the ability to reach another human being to make a call, but I don't need a computing device with me at all times. You can't do that today. So maybe a phone that's even larger could replace that small iPad. And, again, all of these things, if you have the perspective of history, start to look like different iterations on the slide from Jobs' presentation unveiling the iPad, which is you've got a phone and you've got a laptop. Is there room for a device in the middle? I think there is. I just think that like what that device ought to be is still slightly undecided for a handful of people. The last thing I'll say, though, is naming the phone Ultra would, at least so far as Apple's current products are concerned, confer some greater durability. And the idea of a large iPhone that has the best camera that they can deliver, that is something you can drop on the ground while you're hiking and just pick up and keep, something that you can really like hammer on, that could be potentially interesting. Brody Ford, Bloomberg. Dell plans to eliminate around 6,650 jobs, or around 5% of its workforce, taking its headcount to around 126,000, down by around 39,000 since January of 2020 as the pandemic-era PC boom fades. Ford for landing on the most succinct phrase to explain what has been going on in the sales of at least traditional computing devices. The pandemic-era PC boom. Whole bunch of purchases are not getting made today because they were made over the last 2 years while massive numbers of people were told to not go to the office and stay home, and suddenly realized that they needed to refresh the computers in their lives. So it's good to have a phrase for that, because I do think it largely explains what's been happening everywhere, at least in the notion in businesses that deal in selling laptops and components that go into laptops, Intel, AMD, all the rest. The headcount reduction is always empathy for the individual. if I'm on the board at Dell and I look at the fact that their headcount is down 40,000 people since January of 2020, I kind of, maybe a better example are the Meta numbers, or the Google numbers, or the Microsoft numbers, where similar things have happened. I kind of would want to raise my hand and say, can you show me where in the business's performance between January of 2020 and February of 2023 we saw the benefits of hiring another 40,000 people? Because if you can't, how do you justify the fact that that's what you did, right? Like, it's it's not great that you laid off material numbers of people, but you also hired massive numbers in a very short period of time. And why did you do that if you then turn around 24 months later and you let a bunch of them go? Like, what was the point of bringing them in the first place? To me, the story of all of the layoffs across technology companies is this one. It's how do we get enough distance from the pandemic and these layoffs in order to reasonably interrogate what was the necessity of hiring thousands or tens of thousands of people in an incredibly short period of time if there's no evidence that you were able to achieve greater things because you had those people, and by the fact that you're now telling us that you don't need them. Adam Morgan McCarthy, The Block. A16Z used all 15 million of its Uni tokens to vote against a proposal to deploy Uniswap version 3 on the BNB chain using the wormhole bridge. Voting concludes on February 10th. Crypto malarkey, make no mistake, but the fact that one of the elements of businesses built around blockchain technology is that voting is a primitive. It is a basic mechanic that is built into the way things get done with the software. I think that's interesting. I think it will be, it might be a bit of a tough read if you're not already steeped in this world to get through the explanation of what does it mean to deploy Uniswap on the BNB chain? Why is the wormhole bridge being used? And what do those pieces and the way that they are proposed to be deployed together is causing Andreessen Horowitz to vote against making that move? I don't know, but the fact that that's a step that has to take place, that everyone who holds tokens, Uniswap tokens, votes on whether or not Uniswap as a business does other, I think that's worth paying attention to. New York Times analysis. Despite Elon Musk's pledge in late November, CSAM still spreads on Twitter, sometimes recommended by its algorithm. One video drew over 120,000 views. It's not good. There's no question about that. However, this reminds me of a theme which I feel was much more prevalent when we were talking in December, that I put under the banner of we are the content moderators. It is up to us as the users of social media software, social media tools, social media platforms, to be responsible for what content we want to be exposed to and what content we don't want to be exposed to. And the unfortunate fact is, to date, none of these platforms really make the tools for making those choices available to the users in a scalable way. Yes, you can file reports when you come across stuff you don't like, but that's a disaster from a process point of view. And the larger issue is that if you're operating at global scale, the way Twitter's going to operate, the way YouTube's going to operate, the way Instagram is going to operate, the way Snap is going to operate, it's not a tractable thing to take in every possible request for, from user A that says this content is abhorrent to me and I don't think it belongs on the platform. I don't think you can find people who will say that CSAM has a right to exist. It is by definition the evidence of the abuse of children. But there are certainly examples where it's the opinion of one group of people that another group of people finds reprehensible, deplorable, whatever. And I just think that this is another example of where, while Twitter very much needs to address this issue because this is an especially horrendous form of content, by and large, we're not going to make meaningful progress against problems of this type until the social media tools that we use have the capability to empower us to make content moderation decisions for ourselves. Tim Higgins, Wall Street Journal. Since buying Twitter, Elon Musk says his workload has reached over 120 hours per week, leading to little sleep and growing back pain as he runs multiple companies. Pretty sure you can afford a masseuse. There's my little troll comment right up front. But I would hope that Mr. Higgins addresses the underlying issue here, which is, while many of Elon's businesses are making meaningful change in the areas where they operate, most of them seem to require more Elon than Elon has to go around, right? Like the name Glenn Shotwell is probably familiar to anybody listening to this, if by no other explanation than it's familiar to me, as the person who basically runs SpaceX and allows Elon to operate as in a more sort of visionary or figurehead type leadership capacity, but is responsible for ensuring that the business operates according to Elon's plan and his goals. This is not that dissimilar from how Tim Cook got to the job that he has today. He was brought in by Jobs to be the operating officer and get Apple's business running in a predictable and efficient manner. And they enabled Steve to go spend more time playing in the design studio or building out his yacht that he never got to cruise around the world on. That is the sort of person that Elon appears to need at all of these businesses. I'm not aware of a person that sort of meets that description at Tesla. I'm not aware of one at SpaceX. And it's very clear that there isn't one at Twitter. That's, I hope, what this story is there to illustrate, which is the need and perhaps even the short list of people who can execute what Elon believes Twitter needs in order to evolve without him needing to be there and have his hands on keyboards. But if it's just a story about his back pain, then I suppose I'll be disappointed. Ivan Mehta, TechCrunch. After Twitter said free API access would end on February 9, Elon Musk promises, quote, a light write-only API for bots providing good content that is free, unquote. I saw the thread on Twitter where this quote is taken from. The example that someone cited in order to get Elon to share that idea of a light read-only API for bots is a bot that apparently has been running on Twitter for a very long time, but I had never heard of, that simply posts, I think those maybe motion, of a cat going in and out of its cat door, and that's being done by a piece of software that's attached to a camera and a motion sensor, so there's no human being involved, right? It is a bot. But that's the kind of bot that like sparks joy. It's not the kind of bot which, in this thread, Elon points out was part of the reason for turning off API access in the way that they did last week, which is apparently the existing API enabled effectively hundreds of bot-controlled accounts to be spun up and used for undesirable purposes. The fact that this decision basically triggered popular third-party Twitter clients used by, Twitter enthusiasts for many years, Twitterific being the oldest, Flamingo on Android was apparently Marcus Brownlee's favorite tool for using Twitter, and others. It's severely unfortunate, and while there is no doubt a loss of trust in the business because of the callousness of the decision, it wouldn't surprise me, quite frankly, if, again, 12 months from now, like, I don't know what the right number is to sort of judge Elon's run of Twitter, but the fact that we're judging it hour by hour, day by day is very much not the right way to judge it. At some point in the future, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a robust API that allows for third-party clients. The fact that, to my knowledge, most of the third-party clients did not allow for advertising to be exposed to the people that use them, that's a material problem for the business. There's no doubt about that. So I'm sure that was part of the reason for access to those tools. But in a world where adhering to Twitter's API rules required that you showed advertising and that there wasn't a way to just pay the developer of your third-party Twitter client a one-time fee to never see an ad, maybe that makes sense, right? Or maybe there's a version of the future where Twitter Blue has an even higher tier that guarantees that you never see ads because you're paying Twitter directly to the tune of $50 a year, $100 a year. It sounds preposterous, but I promise you there are over 1 million people on the planet who would happily pay $100 a year for the value that Twitter provides to them. But I'm getting well off of the notion of the API coming back in a way that enables joy-sparking accounts like, is the cat in or out, to continue to exist on the platform. That's a good thing. New York Times, sources, Microsoft's legal team expects the United Kingdom's CMA to oppose the Activision deal, which may show a new antitrust enforcement alignment across the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. Yeah, that would indicate some alignment. And I don't know, this deal will be an interesting one to pay attention to. Microsoft continues to show great success in, I think, evolving gaming in the right direction, which is to say, continuing to shrink the library of gaming experiences which require owning dedicated hardware for that purpose, be that a gaming console or a Windows PC or something else, right? the network performance getting to a place where more and more of the video games that anyone would choose to play can be had on effectively any display surface, and that the controls for your game character, that those signals can be sent across great distances of the internet and still have the game be performant and a satisfactory experience. I think that's a good place to want the industry to get to. Does Microsoft need to acquire Activision in order for that to happen? I imagine that's the case that they'll make. We'll find out if that's true. Chan Ho Him, Financial Times. Disney cuts an October 2022 episode of The Simpsons that referred to, quote, forced labor camps, unquote, in China from Disney Plus in Hong Kong after a similar removal in 2021. Would you expect any different from an entity in Disney's position? I don't think that if the rights to The Simpsons had been sold to any other business that you would see a different outcome here. There's no easy answer when the bedrock problem is art and expression that is created by people to critique the behavior and of a foreign government, and the way it treats its people is not welcome in areas where that government holds sway, whether formally or informally in the case of Hong Kong. So it's not good that Disney makes this move, but again, not unpredictable. And maybe a silver lining, certainly not an adequate response, but something is the fact that I sincerely doubt that the people of Hong Kong are incapable of getting access to this particular episode of The Simpsons, this piece of human speech and expression, simply because Disney is no longer provided in their jurisdiction. Jamie Crawley, CoinDesk. Binance launches a free tool to help users calculate their tax obligations, supporting up to 100,000 transactions, available initially in Canada and France. The Bitcoin maxi in me says this is lame, because isn't the whole point of cryptocurrency that you don't need a third party to be the source of trust between any set of parties that want to exchange value? Maybe, right? Like, yes, but to the extent that you want cryptocurrency to reach a mainstream audience and to get into the heads of people at scale, that a Bitcoin or a Satoshi or a fraction of ETH or a Dogecoin or anything else, that you want these to have some nominal visibility, exchanges are a necessary thing. And the fact that those exchanges are going to exist in, or that they're going to serve customers that exist in jurisdictions that have tax regulations that need to be fulfilled by those citizens, you have to build tools like this. So, good for Binance for getting out in front of it. Good luck to those of you who have crypto holdings that you need to pay taxes on them. And don't forget, you can also just exchange Bitcoin with any other person. No one can stop you. Bloomberg, JD.com, China Mobile, and other Chinese retailers are discounting iPhone 14 models by over $100, an unusually steep price cut that suggests dwindling demand. Just a tiny bit jealous of that domain name. Only a tiny bit. I think there are two interesting ways to look at this, or two ways to look at this that are worth pointing out. One is the part above the surface of the water, the understanding of how the iPhone business behaves is more known than it ever has been. Right? There are still, you can find every once in a while, people who will purport to have a rumor that the iPhone that is only months or even weeks away from release is having changes made to it. Most people who move in Apple circles understand that today to simply be complete fabrication. It takes weeks or months to ramp the production of iPhones in order for them to be sold at the scale that they are, which means I will bet you all the money in my pockets, the iPhone 15, assuming that's what they call it, that will show up in September of this year, that thing's locked. Like the features and shape of that product, it's a done deal. And that from here to there, the only thing that Apple is doing to that product is ensuring that the manufacturing of that product has as few failure points and flaws as possible. It's also possible that even the phone that comes after that, the phone that will be announced in 2025, is more or less feature locked today. And so the part that's above the surface here is maybe demand is dwindling because more and more people understand there's a new iPhone every September. And it's February. September's not that far away. I'll just wait it out, which leads to the part of the iceberg that's below the surface of the water, which is, why are they waiting it out? The current crop of devices, the iPhone 14 devices, the last I had heard, some of them are still difficult to get a hold of. Some of them still require wait periods from the moment that you commit to a purchase of days or weeks before it's ultimately in your hands. And I think it's possible that a significantly greater number of people, because of those supply constraints, have made it through the, oh my gosh, it's so exciting, there's a shiny new iPhone and it takes the best pictures that any phone has ever taken and blah, 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 that happens in September. Because they were difficult to get a hold of, many of those people have gotten over the hump of the holiday season and are standing here right now in February and going, do I really need a new phone? Or did I just want a new phone because it looked shiny and it was exciting? That, to me, is the part of this story that's probably worrying Tim Cook. Dallas Innovates. Q&A with former Oculus CTO John Carmack about his AGI startup Keen, how to solve, quote unquote, AGI, how AGI could impact the economy, AI companies, quote, groupthink, and more. This one's probably worth a read in detail. It came out a few days ago, and a user I follow on Twitter, PowerbottomDad1, it's really busy on my street today, pulled out the key quote. If I'm remembering correctly, Carmack believes that an AGI has a 50% chance of being created by 2030 and an over 80% chance by 2050. Where the rubber meets the road there is, of course, what's John's definition of AGI? Is it something that is that looks a lot like ChatGPT, but has a wider scope of understanding and is less prone to being factually inaccurate? Or is it what Isaac Asimov and every other science fiction uh, creator has speculated will have, which is some machine that is sentient and makes decisions that affect human beings, regardless of what those human beings have to say about the fact that that's what's happening? I don't know. Carmack has a high enough street cred in the technology industry that if you're not paying attention to artificial general intelligence and you're only vaguely aware of Chat GPT as a thing, if you wanted to try and wade through one piece to get some understanding of what this moment in the technology industry represents, it's probably an interview with Carmack because he's John Carmack. Madhumita Murgia, Financial Times. Google, Microsoft, and Amazon pursuing investments and deals with generative AI startups, incentivizing use of their cloud services raises regulatory concerns. Raises regulatory concerns is, I think, a very loaded phrase that most likely describes elected officials whose ability to continue to hold their jobs as elected officials depends on a high degree of attention in the media landscape, are willing to speak publicly about the relationships between AI startups and the large established cloud computing providers in such a way as to seem important. Is there concern that these three companies represent a share of the cloud computing infrastructure for the entire planet? I would argue that the moment for that concern was the last time or the time before that or the time before that one of these services went down, right? AWS falls over every once in a while and 30% of the internet just stops working. The internet, what we think of as the internet, Netflix doesn't work and Slack doesn't work and yada, 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 yada. That's the moment where regulators ought to have started standing up and saying, hang on a second, this would seem to be a structural problem, but they didn't. Instead, they're taking the opportunity to say, these new technology companies that are creating something that we have chosen to label with this boogeyman term, artificial intelligence, are in need of meaningful quantities of compute power, and the main providers of those are these established businesses. Wouldn't it represent some level of unfair advantage if those large businesses do deals with these smaller ones? No, that sounds like an efficient market to me. Until such time as there is a meaningful competitor to a Google Cloud or an Azure or an Amazon Web Services, which does not utilize their same structure, which is to say, is not backed by a business that has some degree of monopoly control or other form of massive scale in the arenas where they compete, that's the place where you could have meaningful competition. What would that computer look like? A computer that spans the entire globe, but is distributed in its operation and ownership such that no one entity can manipulate how it's operated or what it's used for? It would be a blockchain computer.